All right. We are here with a person named SG7, otherwise known as Sean, and we're just going to go over a little synopsis and let him share some details about his experiences in various programs, upbringings, super soldier experiences, and whatnot. Spiritual warfare, and the whole enchilada. So, how are you doing today,
Pretty good.
SG7?
Rough night, but yeah, it's been good.
All right. Well, I just wrote down a few questions, and you can just elaborate on whatever and share whatever you're comfortable with sharing. So you've had a lot of various experiences, and you're going to impart some elder knowledge
Hopefully.
to the audience, and your life as a time agent, multiple character files, X-Men, Project Lucid, MP Ultra, Secret Space Program, Project Talent, Time Travel Program, any other ones you can think of?
Mainly the change of tech for civilian purposes. That was really big because everything that was in the Secret Space Program, all the modalities, the mind control, all that ended up sprinkling down into civilian life in some very nefarious ways. So the Beast machine, Beast computer mainly.
Oh, the Beast computer, that's a good one too, because that all ties in with the nefarious forces that are usually pulling the strings and all that. Okay, well, my first question is, can you tell us a little bit about being born into these families? Because we all know that SRA and all that is also tied in with it, bloodlines, blood priming, being born basically into a base, what that entails, and then coming up out of that base as you grow older, what's expected of you, and then being reintroduced to surface world life, because they switch and replace a lot of the kids that are put into surrogate families and whatnot, and then they go back to the base, they get reprogrammed. Some are even raised with Nephilim for a while too. And then, well, it's like a three-part question, sorry it's so long. And then at the end being, I guess, how you integrated with sanity back into normal civilian life, I guess you would call it.
Oh yeah, that's actually the big deal, was that being born and being introduced back into civilian life was always my original challenge, as it were, because I was, my very first memory is being translated in time. Already had reached a certain age threshold, and that was my very first memory, was an angel, a guardian angel, who helped me translate in time, where everything had already been set in place. People that I had knew from a previous life, I guess you could call it the bedrock, spiritual bedrock that I had experienced in...
So you've seen your morphogenetic blueprint in life and how your life was supposed to unfold and unravel.
Mm-hmm. And it started with a very simple dichotomy, which was I had an opportunity to leave very early on in life, kind of like a spiritual test, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
where angelic guidance and soul family offered me an opportunity to live a life of whatever. At that point, it was completely unwritten, because free will is the cornerstone of God's creation. As long as we're in covenant with Him and have spiritual understanding, we're supposed to walk, and everything in our book of life fills itself out. And I made a decision.
Some people's life's missions are more complicated than others.
Yeah, well, it started very simple for me, which is that I was infatuated with a soul family that was already in place on Earth at that time, and
so you could attest to a pre-existence before
Mm-hmm.
Earth life. Okay.
Absolutely. And my connection to it was very healthy and strong, and it wasn't until much later in life that all of that became more complicated. But I had an opportunity to either go back to heaven, as it were, or to stay and see myself out with whatever soul qualities I was exhibiting at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And my main character in my soul was tremendously innocent, pretty naive, but mainly just a protector. I felt extraordinarily fascinated with guarding life in whatever capacity it was. And I could never explain that. Literally just like night programming. That ended up becoming part of the mind control programs later. But my soul quality was always like, must protect life, the sanctity of life, innocence, maybe a little bit selfish because, obviously we're born with a soul quality. And, but I wanted to see that through. That was the first test that the soul family gave to me, was that to jump ahead, because everyone was being translated in time that I knew I could see their souls going off into other ventures.
So even though being born in a base, kind of a secret enemy of God, having soul spirit, you saw even the spiritual mechanics
Absolutely
that are at work already in children that are born in a base.
Yeah, that was the very, very first foundation of my upbringing, was that I had intellect, tremendous knowledge about earthly forces, but none of it was important because all of the children, all of us, we all had a extraordinary capacity for spiritual wisdom and understanding God's blueprints.
That's good to know.
And and you could see the blueprints actually work themselves out, and it was a pathway that only God sees normally, that we were allowed to see and entrusted with a high spiritual calling. But I was born a little bit older than everybody else, including my older brother, who I had seen translated in time and seemed to go off into some other vector that I couldn't quite grasp.
Or follow.
Or follow. But there was a small soul family that, even without any kind of selfish desire or anything, the spiritual mechanics of it was that I was naturally drawn, like magnetism, to be around them almost all the time from a very early age. And
so this soul family that you say came all together, born into a batch, born into the base, they all were translated with you. How much percentage on Earth do you think that people actually get translated through time?
I had asked God that many, many times, because I had more time, and this is part of my testimony as well, is that I've had more time alone on Earth to just sit and to dwell and to ask questions of God, and that His mercy and grace has always been afforded to me, that He's never not lended me an ear. And when I asked that, it was 0.2% of the actual Earth
not very many.
has. I mean, even fewer people have. There's a very small percentage of people who are actually gifted with souls that dwell from heaven, that actually have a piece of them dwelling within the kingdom of heaven right now. A lot of the Earth is born in an artifice, and that builds itself up over time. And I was privy to a lot of the satanic plans regarding that, but it's a very small percentage of people that are actually translated in time and have the DNA template.
To do that.
They're called primes, essentially.
Galactic primes, yes. You would think that type of mechanics would be just used for a specific purpose, since whatever the sorcery, techno-sorcery is doing, the fallen angel plans, them translating themselves, time stalking through time corridors. Do you think that these children were born and saved for the end times to do this, to offset that tactic that the kingdom of darkness is using? Absolutely.
I mean, that's why God put so much, or not God, Satan put so many resources into Project Offset, I called it, which is that there was a very small percentage of primes, galactic prime children, who had the specific capacity to be here in the end times, to even dwell in the time that God wanted them to be in. It was a very, very small number of people. Originally there was 12, and then it got down to 7 children by the time we got to Montauk. Even shorter after then.
So these children were being soul hunted, which the Bible attests to.
Absolutely.
And being taken out of the timelines by agents of darkness.
Absolutely. That's actually me. Speaking of which, time stalking. This number that's calling is related to that. I'm trying to get my details. They call every couple hours.
Show stuff.
Yeah, but yeah, the children that were specifically meant to be here during the end times, the resistance, so to speak. You know, you have the old Terminator character programming, which stems from biblical codes. Everything stems from the original stories written in the Bible, and everything fictitious is just an offshoot of the stories, which are lived experiences that are can be attested that they were lived people who were also translated in time. And a lot of these children had experiences as historical figures that experienced biblical things, and a very small percentage. But eventually, when I was born, originally in 1975 was my birth year. I had a different name, and the actual tactics that the enemy uses was ingrained in me instinctively. I knew exactly, all of us, in different capacities, but all of us children, we had a very strong knowledge of all of the weapons of deceit and subterfuge and sabotage. Every single, we knew from the start how the enemy translates themselves in time, which is completely different, using artificial structures, whether they're technological or demonic, or sometimes the melding of the two. That's basically how they do it. They parasitize and steal bodies, whereas translation, the way that God works, is that there's a full endowment of every single piece of a person's soul into a genetic template, and there's no discrepancy between it. Whereas these people usually take very strong genetic bodies, they take the soul scalp and they kill the person's, you can't kill a soul, but they take the person's spirit and throw it out.
Fragment it.
Scatter
it through timelines and dimensions.
And
bound it up.
The main thing about Project Offset was that there was about, we were called the special kids, which is that from a very, very young age, everything regarding our births, and this was something that even before I was translated in time, is like I said, I was translated in time ahead of everybody else, and I was a little bit older, more developed physically, and was doing things on my own before there was a meeting together in the bases and the various experiences that we all had. Which was that my very first job was just to be a warrior, to
the protector role.
Yeah, that was my very first thing, and I loved it. It was the most natural capacity, because there was no ego about it at all. It was very much like just fitting in with the designs that God gives you, and the dwelling within that is like the happiest the person can be.
So the organic is totally different than, say, getting run through cycles of beast computer systems and having your spirit, your soul, your consciousness siphoned, fragmented, and actually made composite pieces and parts of and cloned. Because they can do that with all parts of us, not just our flesh. Right?
Yeah. And so I lived within that role for a very long time, and was very... there was no fragmentation in me at all, because I knew the weapons of the enemy and I could avoid them. Everybody that I was facilitating around, the other children, were much younger, considerably younger usually, because I was already a man by that point, and they were already sometimes not even teenagers yet. And
so is the sticking point, being stuck, stem from lucid virtual programming in the bases?
No, actually the original before anything else, the original problem was a soul fragmentation that stemmed directly from being introduced to Satan face to face. And then Lucifer, much later, who are...
Which is his son?
His son, yes. And the problem stemmed from my original fragmentation. What led me down the further path was that I had certain soul capacities that nobody else had, except I have a kind of like a time-hopping brother named Michael, who had pretty much the exact same soul profile, but was much more, I would say...
Not Michael Prince. There's
no,
two
no.
Michaels that we know of.
This Michael was tremendously responsible, I would say. It's like, that was my very first word, is that I always called him little brother, even though he was younger than me, but we would time hop and be translated in time by God, where our entire thing was, sometimes we were father and son, sometimes we be son and father, brothers and sisters, or there was never any...
different roles.
Yeah, it was different roles that we would be... and
this happened in missions where you take on different bodies, take on different roles from Secret Space Program mainly?
No. These were tremendously secret. This was just between us and Father God, that we were entrusted with being God's warriors for an appointed time, because we were able to go into the darkest places and not have there wasn't any transference of energy. We were using godly mechanics because we were completely in submission and subservient to Father, to an extent where there was no part of us that would impact his creation outside of his will. So there would be no time anomalies, there'd be no trespassing and free will. I mean, we even respected the free will of demons and
all sorts of creatures.
Yeah, I mean, because that we understood from a very early age the capacity for God's creation and the totality and the perfect beauty of it, and that we had never had any desire to twist it. Our souls were completely in alignment and in covenant with God, and we were entrusted with doing a lot of military missions in a lot of strange places, and the Secret Space Program was the least of it, because it was like we were literally going into the underworld and affecting the hierarchy of demons and not being seen or understood or
the real supernatural grid work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the original laying of God's military structure, to build up his army, to protect his bride, and to facilitate his return. And
I'd say these are the quantum X-Files.
Yeah, and there's nothing written about it because it's
quantum domain.
It's literally just between my brother, myself, and God, and no one had ever...
Right, and one thing I will say, I'll get back to this first question though, but one thing I will say about quantum agents is that they're outside of traceable technology, which is why there's USAPs that are unacknowledged and so secretive that they don't actually have proof of them because of this celestial, I guess, ability that some people carry to retract.
And that actually introduces... or it connects really well to your first question, which is when I was introduced to Satan, because it was like an introduction, and I had no fear of anything at this point in time. I wasn't boastful or anything like that. I knew that I was protected in totality by Father, and there was nothing that could touch me.
The highest power.
Yeah, and I was surrounded by angelic family during this introduction, which was a free will test that I was being granted, where I was learning the discernment as a protector role to the extreme at this point. Because I was off doing these other things outside of time and space, and I was still witnessing the fact that my soul family was being tortured in the bases, and had less memory or spiritual capacity to. There was a couple. Mm-hmm. There was a girl, especially, mm-hmm. who had tremendous ability to understand spiritual mechanics and God's design and the ways of the enemy. She was the protector for the group of kids while I was away. The soul family. She was the big sister. And there was no fear or problems. The problem stemmed for me personally at this spiritual impasse was that I had a natural proclivity to be able to see into all timelines. And this was something else that Michael possessed as well, but like I said, he was more responsible.
Mm-hmm. And you called that Four Square, Four Eyes as a nickname, code name?
I didn't call it that until much later because that's a design I devised after I made this decision. This was, at this point I was calling it Eight Eyes because it was seeing infinitely through all times and spaces, literally being able to see time as God sees it.
So it's like points in a Tenet square.
Yeah, and in this specific instance, I saw all the futures all at once of all of my soul family. And it wasn't that they were in danger or that I feared for their souls or anything like that, but I saw that they were going to go through tremendous suffering. Tremendous, like unnecessary levels of attacks. And Satan couldn't see me after a certain period of this introduction.
So this is soul torture?
Kind of. And what I realized was what I was being shown was very real, and that I didn't hesitate to introduce myself into that situation. Well, I did hesitate. What I meant to say is that I didn't have any doubts about myself regarding what would become of me becoming entangled long term with my soul family. Mm-hmm. I was more concerned about the protection of innocence because I still saw throughout their timelines, mainly the people I cared about most were tremendously innocent, and so I offered myself up as a kind of, I guess you could say that was a sacrifice. I wasn't obeying God in this instance. My discernment was that I was still a very naive soul. I had experienced warfare, spiritual warfare, but it wasn't in an earthly way. I had no understanding of the capacity for darkness at all, mm-hmm. completely oblivious to it.
So surely goodness and mercy follows people whose lives are not like blades of grass, like the majority of people, but have had a certain, I guess, extra amount of grace to have their lives extended through these time corridors of quantum physics and translation.
And the testament that I have to that is that, and this isn't boasting as well, but I had a lot of time. And by a lot of time, I mean close to 1,000 years of linear time, consciousness growth.
Streaming and viewing and processing.
Actual lived experience. Which is, it all stemmed from the decision I made at that moment, which was to introduce myself as a quantum entanglement to block. It was literally like I saw it as I could see Satan's eye wandering closer and closer to these spirits that he was trying to find, mm-hmm. trying to connect to. And I saw it literally like his Sauron's eye gazing upon the souls and looking for him. And
which came from the Simpsons town on top of a werewolf church.
Yeah,
with the spires.
Beautiful structure, that freaky place. But he was always looking for these souls in particular, and I offered up as a distraction.
So when the word says that nothing can take you from Jehovah's hand, it's true in that instance, because the darkness is blind to extent it can't see and follow.
Yeah, and the thing that
shuffleboard.
the problem became is that I saw his eye connect specifically to certain souls before I had made my decision, and he was seeing them in full as they are, and when I saw that happen, that's when I saw their timelines fragment and spiral out, and he couldn't see me in that instance because, like I said, I had angelic guidance and was completely protected. But I spoke with my angelic family, and I did. I directly stepped in front of the beam of his perception and took it to another side of the field, because it did happen in a field. And
Like offensive distraction.
yeah, and I knew very well spiritually what that meant. Very well what that entailed. That meant a long life of a certain level of suffering, unnecessary so, fragmentation even. But like I said, I saw his perceptions connect to these other timelines and these souls that he was tracking.
And these kids that are born in bases processed through satanic networks and computers and the marine kingdom, crystalline structures too. Would you say that there was a supernatural force that got you freed from base life?
Absolutely. That was the
Because
only
at
way.
one point we do get freed
Yeah,
from base life.
There was the problem was is that because of the level of fragmentation I did, it was across a very wide spectrum of time, and even though I was born with galactic prime DNA capacity, which is that I would never lose uplink to God, and that I would always have my full self, the problem became much later, which is that when I entangled myself in them, I had no idea that the actual walking through that 1,000-year period of being beside, because that's all I knew, was I never knew a full life or indwelling with the people I love. I only knew being beside them in time, from the moment I touched down.
Not fully in presence.
Not
Do you think
fully in
God
presence.
allowed you this 1,000-year viewing experience because the fallen angels have always had a 1,000-year plan against humanity and humans to gain an advantage point against that?
Yeah, and it only became later that God actually came to me, not in flesh, but in spirit, and I could see his full manifestation. And this was much, much later in life, after I had already been living a life of fixing little gaps here and there, because that's basically all I was doing at that point, was plugging holes, enjoying the time, even the hellacious, horrible times in the bases and the torture. Things didn't get really bad until me and the girl and my brothers started to witness that I could see my soul energy, and so could they, in all these different characters, people, in the bases, on missions, and they kept coming to me like, what the hell? What is this? I'm like, well, I know that this means fragmentation is coming up very, very soon. I have no idea why it happens or when, but damn, this is something I'm concerned about, because I've had more time alone at this point than with my family. And at this point, the introduction of all of these, they were not full indwelling of my spirit. They were oscillating waves that looked like they were dwelling just above the heads of some very, very bad people in bad situations. And
So like in the shield files of characters, basically the handlers and the programmers ended up using you to stretch out somebody to the fullest limits, like a rubber band, and then learn things that they've never learned before about quantum physics and the human brain elasticity and other aspects.
At that point, I was still tremendously, I would say, naive. Even though I knew I was dealing with very, very bad people, the decision I made was that had to do with this was a mission, an appointment that God had given me, which is that he simply said, I'm going to build a temple from your weakness. Do you, accept that as a as something that, we could do together? And that I will never leave you or forsake you, or I will be with you more, and dwelling within you and answering your prayers and seeking you during this period of time. And I accepted. It was offered to Michael as well, because he had the exact same talents.
A continuance in the time continuum.
Yeah. Which is that was what was promised to me, was that,
and that gets allotted from the courts of heaven.
Yeah, which was that he showed me, and this wasn't a sleight of hand. God doesn't work like that. It was literally, he showed me the entirety of the life I was about to live in a blink of an eye.
So you saw beginning from the end.
Yeah, and I saw from beginning to end and even onward, which was very strange.
So they kind of used you as like a Rubik's Cube and perception gaps and things like that to maybe promulgate probabilities in perception and various timelines for optimal outcomes.
What ended up happening was that every single aspect of the programs was predicated upon this building block. And there were others, but they weren't the prime. They weren't the main area of researcher focus. They were, and I mean, from the foundations of how to mind control people, how to possess, how to develop technologies to open portals. All of these things were facilitated upon how to view into alternate timelines. All these things were predicated upon originally, and this is not, and I know this as a fact, that my DNA template was going to be the primary source of this.
So this goes way beyond Montauk chair.
It goes way beyond Looking Glass. Goes way beyond pretty much every technological advancement. What it came to be was that I felt compelled after this agreement that I had with God was and because I was in free will, I still had free will. It was my soul quality, still learning and adjusting. Was that I had this overwhelming drive to show these people, basically just humans. It's very strange. Go ahead and turn off my phone. But I felt an overwhelming desire to tell them, not show them, not to give them any insight, but to be in the place where they were developing these technologies and say, what the hell are you doing? That's the dumbest thing you could possibly do. You're not going to learn anything by colliding particles and pincering time. You're not going to do anything. You're not going to learn anything from opening up gates.
So you saw many of these
the very
projects as a strong delusion.
Yeah. And it was like, I was I can't take these, what the hell? These people are just, they're not listening, they're not learning. Why don't they know? Like, why would someone want to view and this was something that I had the capacity for on a soul level from a very early age, was that I could view into a person's timeline from birth to death. The problem, there was no problem. I mean, the rub is that I had discernment to a level where I always knew when it was appropriate and when it wasn't. Because there was no misuse of these spiritual gifts. Because I didn't feel compelled to control any aspect of external reality.
So you could work out kinks because you'd see if something was going to blow up in somebody's face.
Yeah, and the problem got to be where, because I was tremendously naive and very irresponsible, is that I kept seeing my loved ones, my soul family, continually smash into walls and receive ever greater levels of fragmentation themselves. And my discernment started to wane then, because my heart started to break for the people I loved. And I started to insert myself into situations where I didn't ask God if that was what was most appropriate. I was like, I felt, like my soul was developing a certain capacity for selfishness and pride.
So you jumped the gun.
Jumped the gun. But it was only after a very, very long time of living a life of, I would say, total alignment and purpose with God.
So how did you overcome types of programming in your upbringing and get past the point of relying on altars and push past those points? You told me something about putting 3 chairs out and actually deprogramming yourself.
Well, that was interesting because I've done it in a variety of ways. Originally, after I entangled myself so strongly with my soul family and inserted myself into situations as protector, as self-appointed protector, that I started to develop wrathful capacities towards the people. Because that was the other thing, was like, I felt so compelled in my understanding of the blueprints that God showed me of his creation and what I had been allowed to see, that I felt no fear for the people that I loved and their suffering. I just felt tremendous, like, why? It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. It's so unnecessary. Because I could see, because I couldn't understand the very innocent thing that God wanted me to see, which is that sometimes that is a person's appointment that I've given them, he said to me. That their soul profile is that's what's appropriate for them.
It's out of your hands.
It's out of your hands. And when he told me that after a certain level, I'm like, you know what, you're absolutely right. And then I felt great shame that I had complicated a very simple situation. But it's, like I said, I was dwelling outside of time. So there was, like, I don't know, maybe 400, 500 years worth of these character files and altars that my friends and family had gone through, where now I was entangled to such a level that I had to be there in some capacity or the other. What that meant, I didn't understand at the time. It just meant that I had to dwell in the same space and the same time as them. And I was no longer beside them in time. I felt like I was an anchor on their soul development. So my very first instinct was the person that I felt strongest connection to. I immediately retracted all of my soul energy from seeking them, or I was good with the level of experiences that I had had.
It's complex, like in an accordion,
Yeah.
being inserted in different parts.
And I understand.
Everybody's story.
Yeah, I understood that I had to be there at certain points and certain times, but I was never going to be or allow myself to be my full manifestation of self around them, out of tremendous guilt for the very simple misunderstanding of the spiritual mechanics that God showed me. That was what their challenges in life were. That's how their souls were to develop. And it's in God's hands. It's literally in God's hands. And I was so ashamed of looking Father in the face and not realizing that now there's a massive amount of linear time that I'm going to have to condense myself into. And
time lost, time made up for the whole mumbo jumbo.
In this instance, though, what was lost was
and dealing with your own stuff.
That
singularity.
This was the very first instance when I withdrew from God out of the shame that I felt. Even though he said this so gracefully and lovingly, and I knew that he wouldn't want me to do this, I was so ashamed that I would impede on his creation. Because, I mean, the level of detail and the level of grace that was afforded to me up until that point was so huge. I'm like, I just assaulted.
Astounding.
Like the pride that I felt in, you know, trying to be protector. And even though he came to me in such a loving way, it's like, you know, he didn't say, you know, it's not that casual or formal, but that's what way it felt to me. It was like a loving father just sitting me on his knee and saying, you know what, I know it's really tough to watch the people you love go through all of that, but, you know, that's...
So you're saying your view into advanced spiritual warfare, interdimensional warfare, led you to have to, well, basically forced you to have some sort of spiritual responsibility and accountability for yourself in order to stay sane.
Mm-hmm. And to do that, what I did was my very first turn away from God, which is that I said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I said this to myself, but I said it to God, basically. And this was the very first instance of thinking I was lying to myself when, in fact, I was lying to Father. Which is that, you know, now I have this tremendous responsibility. I'm made a real mess of stuff. I promise, Father, I won't ask for any help. I'm not going to... Which is just... Yeah, it was a...
You're just doing it in your own flesh.
Doing it. Yeah, I said that was basically like, you know what, I really have to answer for this. You know, I'm going to... Penance, you know, which is nothing. Penance is not what God asked for. Penance is a thing that's selfish because you bring it upon yourself, and that's what I did. Which is that, okay, I'm going to go ahead and live out this 500 years in the flesh. But I'm not going to ask for any help, I promise. If I make a mess of it, you know, full responsibility.
We'll always fall doing it that way. Because no super soldier, even with heaven's anointing, can stand up against the gates of hell by themselves and take on the antediluvian warfare that's still going on the surface world.
And it was actually the girl who told me that.
And in space, too.
who spoke to me, who also had a capacity, you know, was dwelling outside of time and space, was working in spiritual capacities, and was still had her full indwelling, looking down and operating inside of herself in a linear fashion.
Mm-hmm. The roles.
Playing the roles as they came.
The Rose.
And when I spoke to Rose in that moment, in the heavenly capacity, you know, or full indwelling, I said to her, like, I showed her the full engram of everything I had done, and I was like, you know what, this is going to be really tough. I made a big mess of your life and the lives of all these people that we love. So I'm going to go ahead and do this now. And I didn't wait for a response or anything like that. I literally dropped down my DNA code, condensed it, and started to live out my life as a fully linear, static perspective in the flesh with spiritual eyes.
So you kind of cheated as a rogue in the time travel program to jump ahead and see the results of this or that, while other people were still stuck in mind wipes and various glitches.
Yeah, I was already at the... I was literally whole at the end of the timeline. Because there is an organic, and this is something that was very, very specific that I tried to show as many people in the programs. I made a lot of illustrative purposes about it through music videos and such. How linear time actually works. Because we have inorganic false timelines. They're called probabilities, and they follow
can collapse.
They collapse like dross, and
artificial wormholes.
We only had a very short period of time from around 2007 to 2009 where enough probabilities, false probabilities, existed and were accepted by the masses, which was involved with the Aurora Borealis programming I'll get to later. But there was enough people on the planet who wanted to see the probabilities introduced to them through media, where they accepted literally about 2 or 3 years worth of false realities to be the collective reality. Because that's the other thing.
An overlay system.
Yeah. And that was something that I was deeply a part of, was that testing the limits of the collective consciousness of the planet to see how they would react to certain stimuli. How they would react to biblical concepts being in their face, and this was related to Project Bluebeam and other things like that. Multiple suns being in the sky at once.
Synthetic.
And most of the planet, I'd say about 89% of the planet, was willing and accepting, even though these weren't souled individuals. You know, because on that we have a huge population, and about 98% of it is inorganic, fake people who do not have a soul and are not created by God. They're just flesh, organic portals that collect walk-ins. And but majority rules in collective consciousness. That's the rule that God set up for the planet for a certain period of time anyway. And so I forget the question, but
so heaven's will basically gets anchored here and pinpoints here by us anchoring it, our spirit being anchored to heaven, our souls,
absolutely,
by overthrowing the binary and the synthetic realms by alignment, true alignment with the Most High's will.
Absolutely,
because the way we bring down
a person, and this is something that I knew from birth, even to the deepest reaches of my delusion, self-delusion and mind programming, was that a person who is a 3-year-old who's aligned with God has more power to exert on the planet than Satan himself. Because that person...
God's hand is on that child.
That God's hand is on that child, and that child's perception and movement through the world has ripples that are beautiful and elegant and delicate. And that's the way that the bride is supposed to look at the end, is that we're all a body.
That pushes through the veils, yeah.
Yeah. And
way beyond the second heaven.
And I was a part of, I guess I got a little bit out of sequence, which is normal for me, but by this, yeah.
It's okay, it all comes back around.
By this period of time, now that I was fully indwelling and was no longer connected to Rose, her spirit could no longer feel or receive it. I was experiencing life as she experienced it, as the family experienced it, as a self-penance for the pride and everything like that, which is obviously, you don't answer a sin with another greater sin, but, you know, very naive at the time. And I felt that it was, if they were going to experience something, I was going to experience it as well, which is, you know, a selfish need to placate guilt. So I experienced, alongside of everybody that I love, all of their pain and suffering.
Until you realize quantumly disentangling from things that aren't pertinent and necessary to your own spiritual growth is...
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like being a hamster on a wheel. You don't have to do it your way. You can just submit to the Most High.
Yeah. The problem arose that I was not static, and everybody else was, but I was still experiencing all of their pain alongside of them now, which is now I placed myself in a very precarious situation, which is now I've witnessed the worst things imaginable, effectively, and experienced it personally and on behalf of other people, but there was no memory loss. So a person can only take a certain threshold of suffering. That's just key. Because my mind had not broken, I had not fallen into altar. I was literally whole while everyone else was an altar. Being myself. At this point in time, I was just John. This is me. I'm here. Let's do this. And
so because you didn't have all these altars, you're given many keys, many responsibilities, many holdings.
All the keys and all the responsibilities.
All sorts of things that some of the other kids didn't. I think a form of escapism that you chose instead of the programming that we were still stuck in, an identity crisis, was just to stay in this timeline or that timeline by choice, to escape being in one place at one time.
Yeah, so I would live out entire lives alongside all the people that I loved in a non-linear fashion. It was as it came. As it came was like an emotional arc, whatever I needed or felt I needed to experience in that time. Because I was now dwelling specifically only within the flesh, but I could jump to and from. And I wasn't...
Time jump.
I was doing it consecutively. Like I would live out the entirety, 60, 70 years sometimes. Sometimes I'd live to 100, didn't matter.
So you spread yourself out way too thin.
Yeah, and I was living, these were all compacted on top of each other. I could see to my periphery, oh, so that's what I'm doing over there with her right now. That's what I'm doing over there with him right now. Just look around, just like, that's really, holy shit, that looks horrible. Let's not go there yet. Let's wait a little bit.
But those dangers of time travel also have repercussions.
Yeah.
And rebound back into your original core morphogenetic template self.
Yeah.
At some point, I would think.
The problem was that my capacity for escapism was so great that I felt tremendous guilt and shame about that too. So what ended up happening is when I realized, like, I can't just, I hear, like, even now, the words that you just spoke, I would hear those ripple across time, and I'd be like, damn, I'm sitting in that room right now just realizing how dumb this is. And that actually right now we close the perception, I call it a perception gap, which is, my higher self dwelling within that moment. I was like, that really, you know what, that is really dumb. I probably
it's an
should...
interesting aspect, I guess, side effect of time travel. Making music through time, connecting points, and probably making jokes about past or future things that other people wouldn't have any relevance to.
Yeah, it was very esoteric, highly esoteric, which is, how it ended up...
Do you think it causes a neurosis to see yourself run into yourself and view multiple selves in different timelines at once?
Yeah, the problem was that in that capacity that I was still operating at full. All my spiritual gifts were that specific spiritual gift. When I heard those words just now, back then I realized, like, holy shit, I have to close off this ability to see into other timelines. It's not only is this escapism ridiculous, but you know what? It's really not.
I think it would eat you up at some point, like an extended, open-ended amount of spiritual credit that at some point you're going to have to pay for, you're going to have to answer to.
And how I took those words was...
because every action has a cause and a reaction.
In this instance, the reaction was all the timelines I was avoiding, the really, really bad ones, where the life wasn't just hunky-dory.
Comfortable.
I'm like, you know what, I have to start doing those now. But, that's really right. Again, I did.
So, you got to such an advanced level in the time travel program, is what you're saying, that these were like scalar waveforms that you could actually see invisible light collapsing around you until you could formulate yourself into one trajectory.
Yeah, what I was effectively doing was translating myself in time outside. I was not chartable by any technology or part of the programs. I was feared because I was an anomaly.
Then the Time Bureau used this to research.
Yeah, and I went
so
to
they just let you go about doing your business.
That happened just after the conversation we just had.
I think there was some consequences in that. But for the most part.
Really, really big ones was that I saw that the Time Bureau was benevolent and that they had... so I went to them and I'm like, okay, well, I'll teach them everything I've learned so far. And I'll still translate myself in time, but I'm not going to view into other timelines. I'm going to do it how I thought I should do it at that time, which is that...
while trying to remain an asset and useful to them.
Yeah, which is that they would come to me with certain quantum problems. They'd be like, why is this probability... It was a really bad probability. Why is this now...
Or a ping or a vibration in certain areas.
And what ended up happening was that I was the filter for it. So I was the waveform that they were using to chart all of the different problems they were seeing in the past, present, and future.
And we know through research they can do that with somebody's energetic and magnetic field with CERN and other things, and hyper-inducing conducive means of... using their energy to for hyperspace corridors and technologies even.
Yeah, how we got to other planets, if you want to call them that, which are not really planets, but...
realms.
Yeah, they're just realms. And that's how spiritually we looked at it, especially in the secret space program. It's not like traveling in a spaceship to going through an atmosphere and being on. You're just in a realm, which means that you have to be in agreement with certain rules and laws that God has set for that realm, because all things are created under God, and there are certain things that have to be observed and you have to be in covenant with to even dwell within that space. And that's why Mars I was tied to so specifically, was that I was the gate to Mars, back and forth through the realm of Mars for a very long time.
And there's rites and rituals with all of these realms too, and other involvees have even said that they have had like a baptism of Neptune or other things that they need to get washed clean from.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, was like I realized at this point, the only sins that I had done was mess with the entanglements with my soul family, and that for the most part it had already been dealt with. It already been. I'd already lived out all the lives respective to these entanglements and collapsed and closed them, and felt tremendous closure and satisfaction in that. That's when I went to the Time Bureau. I was like, I noticed what you guys are doing. I can't stop seeing your pings just flow through time. And
so these are like scalar waveforms that were recorded, put onto a drive, I guess, and you could see and feel
crystal drive
release from them. Because you weren't over here, say in 1966, feeling lost or in some type of time loop.
No, they were all whole in themselves, and completed within themselves. They were wrapped up as they were in those times and periods, because I was
But it was a physical and spiritual door that would get closed.
Yeah, absolutely.
You weren't scattered everywhere.
The problem was, specifically with my work with the Time Bureau, was that I started to take on responsibilities that I should not have, which is that they would come to me in a tizzy, an entire squadron of people, saying like, we just watched 10,000 people die in the blink of an eye. We have no idea what the hell just happened.
Help us with this.
Help us with this.
This equation.
In this equation.
So what do aperture points look like? Is it like something opens up in the floor and you walk through portal, time window? What are the various structures in time travel?
It seems to be correlated to the design of the human brain. So we are given a certain, I guess you could call it, holographic overlay in 3D space. So we can see it, depending on the nature of the aperture, whether it's good or bad. We see it open in a certain, 3D space, a box around us. And that's where the idea I can see...
It's usually white light?
Well, I could see the I could see like all of them. I'd see them in thousands. Just all around me. Like, holy shit! Almost every single one of them is black now. Something is very, very bad for all of humanity, and I didn't understand that. And like I said, these were all organic processes. When
some things were calibrated right, it would be like black specks, and something didn't look right with the organic structure of a aperture point opening.
Yeah, and the specific problem that the Time Bureau came to me with was like, they said, because it wasn't a matter of observation. I could look at something and it wouldn't grow in size or anything like that, because I was removed from whatever the other end of the spectrum was. The problem became a speck of dust, a very, very black one, became all-encompassing, and it ate all of the other time probabilities. And I looked at the date, and I realized the only way, because I understood the spiritual mechanics of it, this aperture would become full and devour everything else, is if I'm on the other side of it, somehow entangled and being a driving force for this, whatever it was.
So then they used you to be on one point of an event and on the other side.
Yes.
As like a double blind.
Yeah.
Double force.
Because originally, and I was a prism wizard. I existed as, and the thing that God showed me is that my soul could bend into a white sheet cube and reflect any number of things into physical manifestation. I could change.
So it's an energy body arc pavilion versus the fake Metatronic Merkaba field cube that other agents of darkness use to travel on.
Yeah, and I was
because they have to have that, otherwise they'll cease to exist and go back to the void.
And I saw the totality of human civilization.
Metatron's cube.
Yeah.
Call that.
I saw the totality of human civilization and the souls that were translated through time that actually possessed this ability was very, very, very minimal. There's probably about 5 souls that had the white cube spectrum prism that they could therefore manifest physical reality.
And that was a whole time war in itself, the cube.
Yeah, this was an ancient, primordial even, biblical event described in the original Old Testament.
It's archangel warfare.
Yeah, it's absolutely archangel warfare. And what I realized is that the cubes that I was seeing wasn't people being translated in time, it was the embodiment of an archangel. And my specific archangel energy was tied to Saturn. They called my cube before I was in human form Castiel. And this was just naming processes. I'm not saying that I'm the embodiment of the Archangel Gabriel. This was an element of my DNA heritage that I was gifted with a certain genetic capacity to change and manifest physical reality.
Mm-hmm.
The aperture I saw opening in my periphery that was a speck of dust that was microscopic and then suddenly became all-encompassing and became an 8 all other probabilities. And this wasn't my timeline as I was viewing. It was humanity's collective soul. The collective soul of humanity was being devoured by something that I was tied to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, now it's my responsibility to separate and be on both ends of whatever this reality are. Because I wasn't dumb. I went to and from, translated myself and spoke to the other people who had the Archangel prism capacity and asked their opinions about this. And
that have participated in angelic warfare. Yeah. Okay.
And they were like, every single one of them, like, I'm not an idiot. I know what this means. I know that I'm just going to fall further from myself. Every single one of them was like, well, you're the only one who can make your own way past your own, because we all have free will under God. And this point was at some point in some future, my fall was so great that it impacted way too much of the collective soul. Way too much. It changed the fabric and the structure of not just the media matrix, like through Project Lucid, as I talked about before. Wasn't just changing the fabric of... At this point, I still didn't understand what God meant when he gave me the task of building a kingdom for himself out of my weakness. What I interpreted that as, I wasn't seeking guidance on anymore. So I did. I literally, okay, this will be my first cell division. I'm existing now in totality on this side. I'll exist now in totality on that side. I'll figure this out. Sometime we'll come and we'll meet and have an agreement upon how to close these spiritual gates.
Past, present, and future selves referred to.
And then in this
That's
instance,
a big weight to bear.
Yeah, and this was related to every single aspect of these spiritual mechanics. I was taking through the archetypes of mythology, religion, comparatively, and making them manifest for a 450-year period. Making them manifest meaning manifesting these mechanics for a display for the collective consciousness to understand and to understand how I reasoned it was, well, this is, because I understood we were existing in a fallen creation.
That's why the Bible talks about manifest sons of God and what our kingdom authority should look like, and bearing the weight of his glory.
Mm-hmm. And then at this point, I wasn't taking on the weight of God's glory, which is freeing and absolute. I said, well, there's no better way to lead than by example. And I think humanity, now that I've affected in whatever capacity I fully didn't comprehend, I'm going to show them what a fall from grace looks like. That's literally how I put it. It's like, I know I'll be fine. You know, I can see all the time. I just have to look up, and I could see both of myself dwelling within the sight of time, getting closer and closer together. Which I understood is like, okay, I can look up into the kingdom of heaven and realize that within the first layer, just outside of the ionosphere, probably just outside the bubble, I could see, oh, I'm almost done. And that's how I would rationalize it.
So you hid out in the ionosphere for a while, like a golden fleece buffer zone.
Yeah. And I had not yet trickled down the experiences. Like I said, I was down on the ground, changing and diverting historical resources to change the physical manifestation of reality for the purposes as I understood them at the time, which is not good, because I had soul program, things that you take on from all the shit that I had experienced with all the people I loved, those lifetimes where they were living out very human lives, very small, not small as in insignificant, small as in the years that they were experiencing were good. Mm-hmm. They were a good, healthy level, maybe 25. They'd only live up to 25 sometimes.
So in seeing things in the time continuum, you can testify that there's dangers with humans trying to go against thrones or principalities and rulers by themselves, because Bread Ministry has a good explanation of this. Everybody has a star. Everybody has a throne. And when the sons of God fell, the fallen angels, they lost their authority, their throne. And so what they do as a trick that me and you both have witnessed is that they take soul fragments of their human victims in their thrones and their realms, planetary domains, whatever, their rituals. So if you're just a human saying, oh, I come against this principality or this demigod, this archetype, you're hurting the human souls that they're using as a shield and as a buffer. So you have to say warfare prayers that are advanced to strip them of their vestments, strip them of their garments. And we can't engage in this type of advanced warfare without spiritual garments.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because what ended up happening was...
You'll get eaten alive.
Yeah, which is precisely what happened, is that through my many lifetimes, including the really, really horrible ones, I was non-judgmental about the timelines that I had to live through to disentangle and close the spiritual gates I had opened. All of those were done by this point. The problem was that I was now opening a whole new door, just one. And it was one I could never close alone, because I'd have to live out everything I had lived up until that point times 3. It had to be cubed. It had to be squared. Mm-hmm. So it was 450 years times 3, multiplied, and it became unbearable because I wouldn't lose memory. What ends up happening when you live that long a life, and this is what I realized when I made my decision, like, okay, I really messed up. I'm a total dummy. I got it. I'm going to go to all the bad places and illustrate to them how they are making mistakes. That was, again, that's the pride, which is that...
Proving...
No,
make an example.
No, not making an example through their mistakes, making mistakes on behalf of my entanglements with them. So it was like literally going and saying, okay, on this side of time, this is bad me. I'll say it's going to be black and white. And because the very first mistake a consciousness makes is they separate things into binary aspects. So I'm going to go ahead and be the physical embodiment of that mistake. I have no idea what will become of this, but I noticed every single time I made these decisions, I could see my 2 higher self-fragmentations coming closer and closer together in unity. And I wanted that more than anything, because it meant all the gates were closed and I could die is what I wanted. I didn't want anything for myself. I just wanted to be able to literally fix all the mistakes I had made up until that point, not realizing I just made an even bigger one by
retracing your steps.
Yeah, by retracing my steps. But this time I was going to be doing it backwards, literally. And that's the way I saw it, was that there was a plan. It was just a perfect plan. And had I stuck to the plan, for all intents and purposes, I think reality would look a lot different for me.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, it's not about my weakness as it is how God uses whatever appointed vessels to...
And experiences, no matter how bizarre they may be.
And I think that's related to my testimony specifically because I've never been very subtle. Like, certain aspects of my personality have always been manifest strong. Whatever they are in the period of time, they're strong. Like, obscenely so. In this instance, it was literally like, more penance is needed. I really messed up this time. All right, let's do this. We'll do this, and I understand it's going to feel like a long time, but we can do it. We'll close this gate, we'll die, it'll be fine, we'll just go home. And
so how did you survive as a child, being trafficked into various timelines in the time travel program, and what techniques can you share with us that were used, such as like surgeries, age regression, consciousness transfer? You mentioned being in multiple bodies at once on missions, liquid crystal implants, things like that.
Yeah, I think the original fall, when I separated myself into binary states, was I had to call myself something on the other. John here, Sean here. Okay, we got it. Sean John. We'll go backwards in time, close the gate, get the hell out of Dodge. It's fine. And originally, a lot of the survival mechanisms that I had were very on the nose. They were not as sneaky as I became later in life. We've been going a while. Do you want to take a break or just keep going?
I actually have a few more questions.
Okay.
I'll keep going.
I could just ramble on. But eventually, my survival mechanisms became... I started to rely on viewing in the timelines again, because that was my fall to. That way, because I realized I had fallen morphogenetically at this point. You can't separate yourself into two separate entities and two separate waves of time without there being genetic consequences.
Yeah.
So I realized I was going to have... it wasn't half and half, it was literally like... when I separated myself, I took more energy to the end I was going and left the remainder on the side. So it was basically like I was going to be...
unbalanced?
Yeah, so I was going to be more of myself on the side of time where I'm Sean, rather than the original timeline as John. And what ended up happening when I did that was I had all of my spiritual gifts, but they were diminished by about 10% each. So what that meant when I would view in the timelines, I would see way too many probabilities instead of just what I was looking at, which is I could only look at the aperture of the organic timeline before.
So it's an overload of information.
An overload of information. The very first aspect of that was I was on the planet for the very first time as Sean. I looked the exact same as I did before. I'm doing the things I was normally to do, but I couldn't translate myself in time anymore because there was a probability that every single time about 10% of my soul capacity would be left behind, and then therefore the gate wouldn't close. The spiritual gate wouldn't close entirely.
Wouldn't carry over.
It wouldn't carry over. And I only made that mistake once on one mission in one life. And I closed that gate eventually, but I realized then, like, oh, okay, so that's what's happening. I've separated myself into two disparate soul entities, and my indwelling year is reduced, not by much. But
we can retrieve those disparate parts.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, is that nothing is lost in God. The problem became is that the spirit of fear hit me in that moment stronger than I ever realized, which is that, because at that point I was operating at such efficiency, even with my soul flaws, the pride and the wrath specifically, but I could still get the job done and close all spiritual gates that I had entangled with up until that point. And this instance, I realized 10% isn't much, but if I translate myself, I'm just going to be opening more apertures and leaving them behind. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to make a mess of things on this side of time all over again, because I have to go backwards the entirety to meet myself at the other end.
And retain your hippocampus and your amygdala.
The problem was
entities that can hold memories.
Yeah, in this instance, though, I literally changed the structure of my brain by when my soul touched down into my physical body and I became manifest, as shown completely in this instance. It was not a moment that was charted in time or understood or viewed by agencies or anything like that. It was a private moment. But Satan was there to greet me. Just after, because I literally hit spiritual bedrock, landed on Earth again as myself on whatever year it was. I think it was 2020.
Mm-hmm. Didn't Lucifer embody a lot of people in time and use a fake tree of life, the knowledge of good and evil Kabbalah tree as the name pepper tree?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the very first, the problem was that my spiritual discernment was reduced greatly, because the spirit of fear hit me so strongly in this instance when I overloaded my hippocampus and nearly destroyed my human brain. I sat there twitching in my body, viewing thousands of lives and experiences all congealed into one. And
like a natural cerebro state that X-Men shows with the helmet.
It was the first organic experience a human had of the cerebro state, which is...
So did you call that an oversoul experience?
Yeah.
Overmind?
That was when I called it overmind. And so I had the entirety of 1,000 years times... In this case, it had to be squared again, so the 1,000 years was squared as well, so it became about 3,000 years of human experience on both ends of the spectrum, congealing, smacking into each other with such a force that my brain... I would say quite literally exploded, because my soul had to step outside for just a moment. It was when my soul stepped outside that I realized that Satan was standing across the field where I had landed, and I no longer recognized him as Satan. Instead, he was somebody.
But he was still a lion there waiting to devour.
Yeah.
Because he is truly the God of this world that watches and knows the interdimensional warfare that goes on.
He said
many kingdoms and levels that are here.
The problem was that I now couldn't get back into my body because I had exploded my brain by viewing over 3,000 years of quantum entanglements, and was quite literally having my brains leak out of my nose. It was that bad. I'd literally exploded it. And I had never experienced fear like this before.
Yeah, that's beyond torture or paralyzation. So
yeah, because...
Did you need surgeries?
Yeah, the problem was that...
to fix that?
Yes. I had spiritual surgeries right after. The problem was that I made an agreement with the person who came to me, not realizing it was Satan, where I saw the false tree of life, and I had realized... I would say it was an uneasy bargain, because I understood I couldn't trust whatever entity I didn't blindly, but I didn't know how to get back into my body and to bring all things. I had put too many eggs in this basket.
So you accepted
the false tree of life.
More implants, more surgeries, basically Neuralace, whatever they use, and then also further age regression to get placed back into
Linear
society
time.
in linear time.
I was desperate at that point to finish the work I had started, and like I said, I was outside of my body. I had plenty of time, over 3,000 years, to consider the repercussions of that decision.
So there's pictures that are different of you scattered throughout time.
And I realized the reason that my wavelength in a diminished capacity was on all those other people in those many missions and lifetimes that I had with my friends and family was the result of first my mind becoming a prison for Satan to shoot through my third eye. I was now going to operate the theta wave band bandwidth in a capacity that no one else would. And that would, what at the time I bought, would bring my mind back together.
And that's what they show and portray in Watchmen.
Mm-hmm. Was that when I disintegrated, my mind was gone, my heart was the only thing I had left. So the stargate of my heart was, all of my emotions were extreme over a 3,000 year period. Like extreme to the point of like, I don't know if a person can understand that level of grief. To know what it felt like to lose your family and to watch them die, or to disintegrate themselves, or to be alone without them for so long. My mind wasn't the one experiencing this. It was literally the only thing I had in backup was my heart.
Seeing things lost through time.
And that fear expanded. The fear of losing things through time became so great that was my original, I would say, besides the pride and the wrath, the very first thing I accepted was the spirit of fear. I accepted it. I didn't ask or seek forgiveness for it. I sought it. I'm like, holy moly, I have to...
Wow. So we both can agree that a lot of these abilities and things were used and even cultivated through our upbringings, being taken from Montauk into the secret space program, the first program being Solar Warden, ran by Ra, who was actually a evil AI artifice of a demigod, but then we evolved into a benevolent faction of Space Force called Solaris X1.
Yeah.
And do you have good feelings towards the current Space Force?
Oh yeah,
all this?
Definitely. All the divisions now, all the military divisions, and this was something that I knew way back when, before my first fall, was that I saw and observed what I thought was the dichotomy between good and evil, and became obsessed with the mechanics of it on a fundamental level. Watching things become good again, even through the darkest periods. Because I would watch the bandwidth of the entirety of the planet dwell into little beads of just blackness, almost like they were lasers of void light, and that's what all of humanity was experiencing collectively in that moment. But I would see it expand and blossom into rainbows again and again and again. Like, holy shit, how is this happening?
Rewarding.
What is going on? And then I saw at the end, because I did witness the, I guess you could call it the end days, because I still had the spiritual memory from everything God showed me, which is that I saw his plans and understood his plans for humanity and how his will impacts the earth, which I guess is the most organic timeline, because God's will is anchored fully and the bride expresses itself at the end, and all the darkness falls away like dross. It just falls away. And I became so enamored with that concept that Pepper Tree, as I ended up calling him Atticus, is how he introduced himself to me when I made my fall. The concept of, well, you've experienced the highest of the highs, but you can't enjoy your life, this serpent in the garden. And it was a garden that I was in. That's very fortuitous. Just a field here in Missouri in 2020. And you can't fully understand the weight of your love and affection and experiences in life unless you experience the bad. One of the very first things, you have to know the difference between the partition between good and evil, which is only something that Father can ever, the most holy, can ever comprehend. And I bought that lie out of desperation, not actually seeking it. I later became, out of that first fall, obsessed with the concept of, I guess you call it Negrito, which is an alchemical concept, where I now became, that was my primary archetype that I was dwelling within, which is humanity can't know peace unless they know absolute suffering. And I didn't want to be a part of injecting suffering into their lives, but it was a lie that I bought and that I was carrying forth in my broken mind across a 3,000-year period.
That something had to be a certain way when it really didn't.
Yeah.
So that was a falling
yeah.
house of leaves.
Yeah. Which is, you don't, being in unity, there's no discrepancy in your experiences, your motivations. You are whole in God because you are experiencing covenant and joy with Him, which is how I experience most of my life.
It's protection.
It's absolute protection. When I bought the lie of understanding, which I didn't understand, it was very, very legalistic and like I said, my mind was gone. The only thing that was operating was my heart. Pulled on my heartstrings. Like you said, the heart is deceitful above all things. Well, I only learned that after I lost my mind. Quite literally lost it. And
unnecessary pain.
Unnecessary pain. So I realized, like, okay, well, I can't dwell within my body now until all of this gets pieced back together. And that's a really long time. Because my brain will not congeal and be whole. And I was saved in this instance. Angelic family came to me, shoot Lucifer away. It was only then that I realized that I had made an agreement, a spiritual agreement with Satan. And they came and they literally, it was just God breathed a single breath in my mind, and all the things that were leaking out of my face got put back together. And they sat with me for a good while out there in the field and explained to me where I wanted to go next. Where it was like, that was really something to experience, but what do you want to do now? Like
you would call this an experience of falling through looking glass?
This was falling through looking glass before the actual technology existed. This was spiritually looking glass.
But you physically fell through looking glass too and seen a crack in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other viewing lenses that we saw that were lenses of technology used as basically quantum lenses placed vicariously throughout certain cities and structures.
Yeah, I looked at it from a tactical point of view at this point because, like I said, the soul idea had been imprinted on me in that first agreement with Satan of I still had the original programming that I gave myself of embodying and changing archetypal forces. Because it was like that. I felt that was the only way that I could close the gap between the 3,000 years that I had now extrapolated the time box into the life that I was going to have to live backwards. I felt like I had a spiritual amnesia after that, is effectively what happened.
Which would allow you to harm and hurt yourself more by enmeshing yourself into structures and things.
I was literally...
energies and spider webs, the weaver webs.
I literally, yeah. That's exactly what I saw the entirety of the demonic hierarchy. And I saw all the technology potential developing. And I saw them collapsing into each other and then manifesting in full physical reality in that moment. And when I did that, I literally looked at it as like, okay, now I have to go to this entity and see, demigods, demonic hierarchies, and I have to understand what their archetypal role is in God's creation completely. So I would do it very systematically, go from top down. I started with Lucifer and just worked my way down demonic hierarchy and the demigods and whatever, because they would come to me and I would make agreements. This is a nightmare, spiritual nightmare. When
the right way to do it is to pray and activate the angelic warfare in the heavenlies to war on our behalf.
Yeah, I was literally like, well, that's something that the other people who were operating with the prism tech were trying to get me to understand, but I wasn't fully grasping.
So would you say the children, the Montauk children, the 80s children, they became carrier waves and an extension of the Montauk Tower and certain things that were embedded into them and their psyches? Were these children that were sent through looking glass And Hypertech also carriers and organic extensions, and of even Tesla tech too to this day.
Yeah, the entanglement became, by the time I got to Montauk, I'd already made this fall on both ends of the time wall. Had been collected enough that I could operate in the original roles that I was supposed to. And I did. I experienced it from a linear perspective with these children. The problem was that I noticed that they were carrying the same baggage that I had already agreed to and was trying to heal from. Because I had realized when I made the agreement, I was saying, like, this is nothing I want. I'm going to be in spiritual amnesia for a long time, and I couldn't quite carry memory from life to life, from moment to moment, the same way I could spiritual memory.
They were like crystals.
And when I noticed the towers and all this, I'm like, this is really familiar. Why are my soul family being piggybacked? Like, I showed all the tech people, how to kill that in the previous timeline. There doesn't make any sense why it would exist and why they would be focused on. And then I realized me existing on this part of the time wall, I had taught the forces of darkness how to effectively utilize that spiritual weaponry. So again, I was taking responsibility for something that I don't even know if it was appropriate, but I noticed that it only existed because I was there and that I was sharing space with them. So I made it my goal to kill the entity that was specifically controlling the tower, because I realized I could do that very easily.
Mm-hmm.
But I was now waging a war against time dragons, effectively.
Serpents of old.
Yeah.
Those are like cosmic serpents.
And that was like, I realized that all of the things that I hated most were time-stalking entities, because I knew them. I knew their names. I knew their souls, whatever, profiles. Call it
and that's Satan's game, like a time worm, hell worms, eating time. And then Saturn's game.
Montauk became especially hard for me because I realized so many of the people who were doing bad things, they were operating with my DNA somewhere within them, and I couldn't understand how that became so. The ones who would rape and torture and kill and sacrifice children and open portals, try to steal souls,
quantumly entangle you to various points.
I would look at them in the eyes and realize they have 5% of my DNA. How the F did this happen? So while I was at Montauk, I was living life linearly, but I was still utilizing my ability to view into timelines to literally just move around them. I would play their game, where I would go through the rituals, indoctrinate myself, try to get programs, and do the things that all of my family were having experiences of. All the while, literally, and this is something that none of the bad people at Montauk understood, was that I was just orientating myself right behind them as they were doing it in physical space, in time and space.
Because you had been trained to take over a body, overwrite consciousness, and do various superhuman feats.
In this instance, it was because I understood that...
Even shape-shifting.
Yeah, I had the capacity to shapeshift always. I'd never really utilized it because I didn't need to. I wasn't seen by works of darkness. They couldn't perceive me. I would just move around them. And in Montauk, that was my favorite thing to do.
So how does that happen? How is the best way for us who are on a draconian hit list to get off of it? By disconnecting ourselves from the beast computer that traces our signatures?
Well, the thing with House of Leaves was it was supposed to be a blueprint for facing the worst of the worst parts of yourself, the things that hurt you most. And it didn't get finished, obviously. The large section of the diaries were... Well, I destroyed them because I realized that I still had 35 years to live of my linear life outside.
And that's the other various time diaries and time journals that were misplaced and stolen and lost.
Well, this one was given because I
Yes.
was in full control of, except for some girl who kept finding them in the floorboards. It's a pain in the ass, but eventually I realized that I could write what I knew was going to be my future, or I could just live the damn thing out and let it organically happen the way I knew it would be, because I had already entrusted myself to God at that point. The point of Prisoners of Earth and being big brother and big sister to a team of the base kids was, we have tools. We have tools where we have the capacity to face our experiences and traumas and give that to God, because that's literally the only way we are ever free, is to face our spiritual strongholds, to admit and accept responsibility for our actions, to repent for sin, which is, a lot of people don't realize, we're not judged in the capacity where we feel like we have to repent for our sins, or else they just keep manifesting in our lives. And sin is the carrier wave that all enemies of darkness utilize to impact and affect physical life.
And
Like I said,
and to snowball.
And it does snowball.
It's piling on top of it.
Because, like I said, not only at first was I not perceived, I could literally walk around a fallen angel, stand behind their back and tap them on the shoulder, and there was no communication between our energy spectrums. They just didn't know I was there, because I was still operating.
That's like ghost protocol.
Yeah, and that's why I originally...
Speaking of snowballs, you said that there was artificial aurora borealis coming out of the Antarctica Nazi bases?
Yeah. Like I said, with the really messed up part of me, when my mind was gone, my mind was literally separated from me from time and space, because those fragments in that moment were collected and put into the beast computer and held away for another time, another place.
Captive.
Held captive, literally. So it existed in two different states. It existed in my physical body, whole, spiritually restored, and then in this base. And I didn't realize this at the time, but they were literally shooting... I saw Lucifer. He took a crystal from he had a chamber egg that he dwelled within, where his soul was called the Soul Stone. It was this massive thing the size of a building that existed within an underground base for a couple hundred years. And they took a fragment of that.
Is that like the dark crystal?
Yeah. That was the original dark crystal. Was that the Soul Stone, which was eventually placed in me in a ritual, but they placed it within my physical brain in the third eye, in the dark crystal, and Lucifer would stand behind it and this green light, laser beam, straight through it and manifest bits of physical reality. And
so it's not really a reflection of inner earth or the organic sun. What you saw was
literally the physical manifestation of hell on earth. And that's why I was called, at this point, within the space program, I was called Doomslayer, because I had one specific goal, and that was to go into every base, recollect the fragments of my brain, remove the soul stone from it, and kill thousands of demonic demons that were residing there. And that was my one goal, was to just retrieve my brain for a very long period of time. How that relates to the other children and the release of sin was that this was a physical manifestation of the mind being a carrier and literally a manifester for darkness. And I understood in that moment how all the other...
the mind is the seat of the soul.
And even though my soul wasn't capable of even understanding the evil that was being shown through it, the dark crystal implant was literally a fragment of Lucifer stuck into the corners of my brain, and all of my genetic capacity to manifest physical reality. All of my things that I had messed up with in that moment had been cleared. I had closed all spiritual doors. The problem was now I saw thousands of those apertures, that is what I call them too, that were Lucifer having manifested through my physical template, my morphogenetic blueprint. And
which all stems from a seed, a thought, a hook in the mind. Is that
yeah.
why it says, love the Lord thy God, first commandment, with all thy mind?
Yeah,
Protect
and
their minds.
in this moment, when the spirit of fear, that wasn't love. I was feeling I was not obeying a commandment directed to me. I mean, I was under, granted, it was extreme circumstances, but there's no excuse. You fall into sin either way. And what ended up happening in that was the very first hook was to be the physical manifestation of the pepper tree, the false tree of life, in physical reality. And I wasn't spiritually stupid. I hated that crap. I hated it.
So a big part of deprogramming is get rid of the dead tree of knowledge of good and evil, the black Kabbalah stuff, because every MK Ultra person has been programmed with it.
Yeah, that's the thing.
As a manifestation template.
And that's when I took on an even greater false responsibility, which is now I saw the false tree of life implanted in every base child, including myself and all the other children. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this has to be healed. They're using me to manifest all the torture. And this is what I saw in the aperture and how I was affecting time and space, was that all of the base kids, all the primes, were being tortured.
Mm-hmm. And they program you to climb the tree. And
that's why I took on that responsibility, was that the false responsibility, mind you, was out of the guilt and shame of having turned my mind over to that idea. Was like, okay, maybe if I experience, because I saw the totality of all those apertures, and I literally took my hands and I collapsed them all into one, and I jumped through that aperture in that moment, and I said, I will embody the false tree of life. So, and I actually, the spiritual mechanics worked, for better or for worse. It was irresponsible and it wasn't necessary. But what ended up happening was, as I saw all of the programming of the other children snap off one by one, by one, by one, and it just felt like dominoes. And I felt, okay, I know what this means for me, that all of their programming, because it is the seed. It's literally the seed that every single child who's been abused is implanted with. Mm-hmm. If I use my morphogenetic template to clear and cancel, which isn't necessary, all you have to do is pray to God. All you have to do is to seek and release. But it had already been done in that moment. I jumped through the aperture and I watched all the base kids, thousands and thousands of children.
So it's a little different than the hero complex archetype that's like a martyr. Mm-hmm. So you've said that you've seen Leviathan virus, Leviathan eggs, things that are ancient like that, and these surviving super soldier children have actually been sent in time and fought like zoomorphic things, giants, things that most people don't commonly see.
Well, I didn't really answer your previous question, but it ties to this one just
okay.
Fine. With the Aurora base and the problem with the manifesting of physical reality, the false tree of life, with the Nazi base in the North Pole, like I said, my mind still, not really, I think it's been resolved. But at that time, this was before the onset of World War I, the Nazis had been jumping back to the previous century and holding space in the North Pole. They were using some frequency tech I developed and using it to broadcast my wavelength, my brain wavelength, across the ionosphere. It ended up getting perfected after the Chernobyl disaster because they tried to do it with a hive mind of a bunch of people. They realized that nobody, more than one person, can hold an agreement for long enough to hold a structure. So they used one, and it was always they always had to find one brave wavelength to be the carrier for a specific thought frequency. Mm-hmm. In this instance, they were going to manifest
the broadcast.
They were going to broadcast from the start of the 20th century to now the wavelength of the same frequency that held the artificial tree of life of my mind in the base. And So I went there seeking to destroy it. What I didn't understand when I translated myself there and went to that base when it was first founded and saw the Nazis and stuff like that was that they weren't cognizant. They were all walking literally drones and being puppeted by fallen angels. So I couldn't impact the physical space there the way I needed to. So again, I just viewed it systematically. How do I enter this space that's cordoned off that I can't get to and kill the fallen angels who are puppeting the Nazis who are carrying remove A to collapse C to get to B. It's you go back and forth.
It's a wrench in the works.
Yeah. So I realized that I was spiritually seeing that these Nazis were just vessels and that they were being puppeted by fallen angels. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the source and kill the fallen angels that are puppeting them.
Manufactured army.
Yeah.
Manufactured beings.
Yeah. And,
Tesla himself, you said, was somebody that was...
he's a character file. He was created the buffer who actually created his technology.
Okay, so time jumpers were Tesla in different time periods, is what you're saying, to hide that type of technology over waves in time?
Yeah, a specific family bloodline was gifted with, and that was my idea as well, just having a character that everyone could jump in and out of to protect the sanctity of frequency tech, because you could literally crack open hell itself if you weren't careful, and we experienced that plenty here in Missouri. But
it's the most highly coveted.
Yeah. And I realized
intel.
Since I was there at the seat of its creation,
and tool in this universe,
and that it was passed through my bloodline for such an extent that this was responsibility that we had to be and to seek it out. Tesla was the face of who actually made it. I would say has a large percent of my genetic profile, because to operate at the level he needed to have the full spiritual capacity to see, and that required all of us in the family to give a little bit, but I was like probably 80 or 90% of the genetic template to mold his brain, personality, and the rest of the family would carry that. And how that relates to Aurora and the base and all that kind of stuff was that when I made the decision to fight the fallen angels, I realized I couldn't enter that space because evil couldn't perceive me. Fallen angels couldn't see me. So I had to make myself known. So I literally stepped forward. I made a decision. I made a step forward to make myself visible to the enemy. And it was like a feeding frenzy. And I had lost my mind to such an extent in that moment of like spiritual fury that I became addicted to it. I was like
sounds like you made yourself a big target.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there were thousands of them there. And these things were very, very tall. Mm-hmm. And I realized that making myself known, and I understood the capacity that fallen angels, they can follow through time and space, that what I was doing was setting myself up for a temporary assassination mission where I would kill every single fallen angel that could perceive me through time, which was all the ones that I was fighting. So I sat there at the base, and I did that. I did just that, where I dedicated myself to just finishing that job of killing all who had observed me, because that way I could move back in time and remain unseen by the enemy. Mm-hmm. The problem was that there was one specific fallen angel who was dedicated to being, I call him the architect. He's basically the physical manifestation of the demiurge.
Mm-hmm. PAX?
Yes. And, he was the one that tried to build Rome, Mongolia.
Build up empires?
Yeah, he was the one that was behind the idea and ruling Satan's armies. He was basically the one who built and commanded Satan's armies for thousands and thousands of years. And I gained his attention because he was the one puppeting the thousands of fallen angels. I couldn't see to that level of evil yet. So I made myself known to the architect.
And became an arch enemy
Yeah.
to the architect as a result.
But I stopped the frequency enough that it didn't reverberate past a certain point in time. After World War II, it petered off. Ended up getting picked up again in Alaska in a remote array. They tried it again because I had killed myself. I had blown my brains out and taken on amnesia and sin again in that fall because I obviously couldn't remember what came before that moment.
And you erased your identity out of other operatives' minds that had seen you in certain instances too. So they might have a knee-jerk reaction to you since your identity is spanned through so many layers of time.
Yeah. So their experiences differ so widely because I was so fragmented. The body of what I look like, how I sound, how I behaved, and how I treated them was so varied that originally I had tasked myself with, like I said, because of the fact that the artificial tree of life was planted in all the base kids, was that I became the overmind for the underground cities for a long period of time, which is that I witnessed and observed everything that happened there. I didn't impact it in any way for a long time.
Well, you created some designs in it.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, like, for the longest time, I just observed and watched even myself be tortured in them, but I watched them take me out of the bases because I could communicate to myself as overmind, and I could literally teleport children out of the bases at will.
And you rescued your own self.
Yeah, they stopped bringing me to the cloning center, so I created a fake personality, just a character profile. A lot of people know he's like a so-called, this was a program of a bunch of us soul surfers worked on, so that I could have eyes in the cloning centers again, because I had extracted myself as overmind for the bases, but all of the kids were still active there and were still trying to get their stories out and trying to escape. So I don't think it. I think it had some of my DNA, because I thought it was kind of a given. I used my DNA like a tool. Like it was spread out through all the time. I'm like, I'll just collect it and use it for whatever the purposes are, because I'm just gonna close this gate and get the hell out anyway.
Should probably wrap up soon. So there's lots of the Time Wars, a lot of various different wars, Clone Wars. Would you say like this goes back to what time period? Like royals having their own children replaced and cloned, or some of them translated? Did you say like 1800s? What would be like the Clone War type of?
The Clone Wars pretty much started in Babylon. I saw Alexander the Great, and I saw a specific seed from the Anunnaki carry forth and evolve into what eventually became the Royals. I saw Satan shifting certain DNAs, and that was the other thing, was that the reason I was an asset and a hindrance was that I saw everything the enemy did from the start to the end.
From super far back
to
back. Super far into the future.
Prehistory into the future, yeah.
That makes sense.
And even...
So you're like a through line.
Yeah, and that's the other reason...
For the whole program.
Yeah, that's why I thought I took on unnecessary amounts of responsibilities and affected so many of the other base kids, was that if necessary, I rationalized it like I guess any human would, which is like, okay, well, I guess I am a through line. It would be my responsibility to close that gate. You know, that's how a person rationalizes it.
So any last thoughts about like a testimony or witness why God preserved your life and let you live? This obviously there's a sovereign God of this universe.
Absolutely.
With all the things that you've seen and experienced and spiritual hierarchies and courts of heaven. What would be the main driving point to help people with these experiences, that purposefulness of your life?
The purposefulness of my life is, I had to break it down to something really humble, because for a very small period of time, I did have a martyr complex. Well, at first it was a hero, then martyr complex, and I dissolved those for the most part, let's say. For the other children, it's that there's nothing, there's no sin, there's nothing that you've done or that you've experienced that can't be accounted for or brought back into unity with Father. Nothing.
Except blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. The unforgivable.
Well, yeah. What I mean is that I'm not speaking about the reprobates. I'm speaking about the people who are capable of being saved, the redeemable. And I've answered for blasphemy, and I've been judged mercifully
against the Messiah.
Yes. Originally out of amnesia, but then knowingly. And I was brought to a threshold in that moment when I was speaking blasphemy against Most High. And he spoke to me directly, very mercifully, knowing that I was doing something unforgivably. And I don't think that relates to my testimony as much as the fact that so many of these base kids, and this is ridiculous, but I know each and every one of them individually. And I saw which ones were redeemable and which ones weren't, from beginning to end. And I know, not intellectually how their lives lead or anything like that, but I know that God closes the distance so much for these children. All it requires is understanding that you are living in sin, possibly still to this day, unless you've fully given yourself over to God. Very few of the children have. Many of us still carry New Age programming and various offshoots, because New Age programming is basically like the fuzzy comforter that many of us who had the Kabbalah programming took on to ease our suffering. Once you get rid of this stuff about Christ being a Christic energy, and that it's just one thing, and that there are many, all the New Age programming, doesn't matter. Seek Father's will. Repent of all of the aspects of yourself that are still held in sin. And the fact that I can testify that I've witnessed so many of these children be saved by God, that are still dwelling within this linear time, just like me. I'm just moving forward. I'm not traveling in time. I'm just my consciousness is traveling nightly still to observe a bunch of points in time, and it's pain in the ass. But that's the predicament I put myself in. But we're all living this life in a static way now, all of us. And that's literally the only way that any of us can have a healthy and flourishing life. All that stuff can be abandoned within an instant.
And peace of mind.
Yeah. Which is the ultimate.
Amen. Well, there you have it. One of the world's greatest time travelers is here to bear witness that surely goodness and mercy will follow those who love the Lord all the days of their life. And that's proof positive that the Most High has love, has mercy, has goodness, if it's following you. If it's following your life and your life is bearing good fruit, then you know that you're in good hands. And that there's a master of the universe who holds all time because he lives outside of time and space and isn't subject to the tangibility of the dimensions that humans and angels have to mediate through and go through here. But there is still a high priest in heaven who is the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, and he intercedes for each and every souled individual to translate them and bring them into the kingdom of light, Yahweh's kingdom, the kingdom of his dear Son, so that we can have life abundantly and that we can use all our human experiences and all things we've been through to bring glory back to heaven. And there you have it.
Amen.
Anything else? Last final thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of hang-ups I saw and felt in many of the base kids, which is that they will not call upon Father by name. Yeshua HaMashiach is our Lord and Savior, our Messiah. He does have a name. I asked what to call him when I greet him, and he said Abba.
Yes.
So please do.
All right. Over and out. Spasiba.